Tribbles are proof that Star Trek's Federation are hypocrites. When it comes to Star Trek, few creatures are as deceptively simple and yet philosophically charged as the Tribbles. They're small, furry, endlessly multiplying balls of fluff that first appeared in the classic Star Trek, the original series episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. What was intended as a comedic breather from the weightier stories of galactic diplomacy, Klingon conflict, and existential threats has since taken on a life of its own in Trek canon. But if you look closely, Tribbles also shine a harsh light on the Federation itself, an organization that loves to preach about compassion, tolerance, and infinite diversity in infinite combinations, but stumbles when faced with one of the smallest life forms in the galaxy. The Tribbles are living, breathing creatures. They feel. They respond to their environment. They reproduce, excessively so, but in a way that mirrors how other species evolve traits to survive. Yet, from their very first appearance, the Federation, and Starfleet specifically, treated them less like life forms and more like pests. The Enterprise crew saw them as nuisances. The bureaucrats of Deep Space Station K7 treated them as infestations, and even Dr. McCoy, the ship's voice of compassion, dismissed them as practically born pregnant and useful only for being cuddly. That's where the hypocrisy creeps in. The Federation constantly prides itself on being the great defender of life. It often criticizes other civilizations, like the Klingons or the Romulans, for their disregard for weaker species. Yet when faced with Tribbles, harmless, non-aggressive creatures whose only crime is multiplying too quickly, the Federation's response is extermination, not empathy. Federation standards suddenly shift. This double standard becomes even more glaring when you compare the Federation's treatment of Tribbles with its stance toward other life forms. Consider the Horta from The Devil in the Dark. Initially, the Horta was viewed as a dangerous monster because it killed minors, but Kirk and Spock worked to understand it, uncovering its intelligence and saving its species from genocide. The Horta was respected because it could communicate and reason. Tribbles, on the other hand, lack advanced communication. They don't fit into the Federation's tidy definition of intelligent life, so they get shoved into the category of vermin. Starfleet doesn't bother to explore whether Tribbles might have forms of cognition we don't understand. Instead, they're dismissed as a nuisance and subjected to control measures. It's selective morality. Advanced and interesting species deserve protection, but lower creatures are expendable. For an organization that constantly chastises others for judging species by arbitrary standards, this is a pretty glaring blind spot. The Prime Directive stresses non-interference with developing civilizations, but apparently, it doesn't apply to life forms without warp drives. The Federation can justify its treatment of Tribbles by calling them pests, but at the end of the day, that's just a convenient way of ignoring its own ideals. Klingons and the Federation, strange bedfellows. What makes this even more ironic is how the Federation and the Klingons actually share common ground when it comes to Tribbles. Klingons famously despise Tribbles, seeing them as an affront to their sense of order and string. In Deep Space Nine's Trials and Tribulations, it's revealed that the Klingons went so far as to attempt to wipe Tribbles out through biological warfare. That is clearly cruel and in line with their militaristic culture. But while the Federation might not have launched genocidal campaigns against the creatures, its casual dismissal of Tribbles isn't that far off. In practice, the Federation and the Klingons arrive at the same conclusion. Tribbles are better off dead. This is the same Federation that proudly boasts about finding beauty in all forms of life. The same Federation that reprimanded Captain Picard for considering the extermination of the Borg, even though the Borg are actively hostile. The hypocrisy couldn't be more glaring. The mask of comedy. Of course, the reason Tribbles get a pass from audiences, and maybe even from the Federation itself, is because of how they're presented. Tribbles are comic relief. They're silly. They're the gag that softens the tension of space politics. But just because something is played for laughs doesn't mean it can't hold a mirror up to deeper truths. Star Trek is often at its best when it challenges the Federation's image as a perfect utopia. Tribbles remind us that even this supposedly enlightened society has blind spots. The Federation may champion diversity, but only the kind of diversity that makes sense to them. Tribbles, as a life form that doesn't fit into the neat hierarchy of sentient beings, are brushed aside, laughed off, and exterminated without a second thought. A lesson still relevant. The hypocrisy of the Federation's attitude toward Tribbles feels especially relevant today. In the real world, humans often divide life into categories of valuable and the Federation, for all its progress, falls into the same trap. The Tribbles may not be